met before. My name is Brian Marshall. I am the founder director here at Lewis House. Big kind of changes since our last get together here. We kicked out the semi-heathen horde known as CSF out of our building here. Christian Student Fellowship has opened their new facility across the street. And so what that means for Lewis House is that, hooray, we actually have our own space and can spread out and do some of the additional things we've been thinking about and dreaming about, praying about for a while, including one of the plans that we have at some point, maybe I should call it maybe a hope more than a plan, but we continue to have conversations about that, is actually expanding the size of this room. So the hope is in the not too distant future, probably for this year, we're in this space because our hut that's behind us is getting ready to come down, where some of you may have attended lectures before. But there is plans, hopes, of knocking out this back wall here and actually expanding this basement into a larger space. Would actually hold about twice the size of what we have here. So just some long-term plans that we're thinking about here. So, but welcome everybody here tonight. If you are new here, we hope you got a chance to sign in because we'd love to just keep you updated with our newsletters, let you know what's going on around Lewis House. Hopefully, maybe a few thoughtful pieces here and there to get to engage some just key topics that we come across. We think other people might appreciate getting a Christian viewpoint of how to think about this. So, if you haven't had a chance to sign up, please do. We are excited this year. It's our first lecture for the year, but some things are already going around here. I see some of our scholars. We have scholars in the room. Make some noise, scholars. We have a crop of new scholars this year. It's our largest group yet, even though we're still we're at capacity. So we actually had more people apply than we were able to take, but we have, I think, 60 scholars, is that right? Okay, wow. 60 months, so 60 scholars this year, going through a 2-year program of reading literally thousands of pages of text over the couple of years, of just learning everything from reading ancient church sources all the way up to contemporary cultural criticism from a Christian perspective. And we're just so thrilled that we get the opportunity to walk with them for the couple of years that we do. And so it's one of our favorite parts that we get to be involved with here at Lewis House. So honored by that. If you would like to read, maybe not thousands of pages, but you'd like to read, I don't know, what is this, about 150 pages. There's a book that we are going to do a book group on targeting you. If you're beyond college, but you go, hey, I'd still like to read, maybe a part of something. There's a book that some enjoyed here called How to Think by Alan Jacobs. He's a professor down at Baylor in Texas. And like I said, not thousands of pages, just about 150, and it's even smallish kind of book here. We are going to be doing a book group, and it starts October 13th, so in about a month, and runs through November the 10th. So if you are interested in that, you can email CJ. His email is so easy, cj@lewishouse.org. Or you can just go to the website. If you forget that, like, who was that guy, that CJ guy they mentioned? If you forget that, just go to the Lewis House website. There's a contact form on there. Just fill it out and say, hey, I'm interested in the book group. Can you send me some more information? We'd love to have you all be a part of that. Also, one of the other things that we're doing, our apologetics class is underway here at Lewis House. We're thrilled to get to teach students here. Our partnership with Asbury is a wonderful one where students take 4 credit classes here through a partnership with Asbury, and thanks to our generous donors, students actually only pay $100 per class. So they pay, and that includes their books. So $100 for a 3-hour class. They take the class here. In fact, the class meets here in this basement, and then they transfer it into their UK degree. And so it's a really unique partnership. I don't know of anything quite like it. There's a couple other things that are similar to it, but there's nothing quite like what we're doing anyplace else in the country. So it's a really unique partnership. We're thankful for that. Our own Dr. Derek King, our scholar in residence, we continue to have some expanded conversations with the university, because the University of Kentucky, not Asbury University, but University of Kentucky, has been maybe I should say, there are people at the University of Kentucky who have been very supportive of what we are doing, and they have given us the opportunity to do some expanded things. And we're in some really interesting talks. I know Derek's teaching a New Testament course. He's taught that here at Lewis House. This semester he's actually teaching it across the street at UK, and is slotted to teach a couple more classes across the street at UK next semester. So we're actually teaching some courses here at Lewis House and some even under the UK umbrella. A little bit different angle, but still really, really interesting stuff. And we're thankful for those partnerships. Next semester, just in case you're like, hey, I want to go back to school and start writing papers and reading lots of stuff and having people grade me and tell me how much I stink or how smart I am. We are going to be offering, it looks like, 2 or 3 classes, but what we're debating on right now, it looks like we're going to offer a course in Galatians and Romans, so it's kind of a deep dive that Dr. King, Derek, is going to be teaching kind of a deep dive into those two books of Paul's, Galatians and Romans. We're also looking to do a philosophy of C.S. Lewis class, so kind of diving into the thought of Lewis. Big surprise that we would offer that course here. And also a unique course on Christianity and finance. How to approach finances, how to think about money from a biblical perspective, because the Bible talks a lot about that. Jesus talks a lot about it. And so as Christians, how do we think about money and how to use it, how to spend it, how to steward it? So those are just some of the courses we're going to be offering next semester. Like I said, if you're interested at any age and you want to sign up, you can. We'll be detailing more of that later. Lastly, before I introduce our speaker, I will say, well, two things. We are going to be doing some travel potentially in the next few months. And so Derek is going to be coming up here a little bit later to talk about that. So if you've got a travel itch, I'd kind of like to do some cool travel to maybe some places that might be of interest to me in my faith, you can do that. I personally am taking one of those trips next semester, but you're all not invited. It's just myself and my wife and kids. We're going to Italy next week, so I'm going to go Rome, Florence, and our oldest is a senior in high school. We're like, yeah, this is it. She's going to be off on her own separate schedule this year, so let's do something fun with fall break. So we're headed to do a trip. But if you want to do one with Lewis House, you can certainly sign up for that. Our next lecture, I just wanted, before we introduce our speaker tonight, our next lecture is next month. It's on Tuesday, October 14th at 7 p.m. It's Dr. Joy Vaughn, who is a New Testament scholar at Asbury University. And her work, this is really kind of in her field of study, and I think it'll be a dynamite talk. And again, this is October, so think about October and Halloween and these sorts of things. Christ the Exorcist, a theology of spiritual warfare and what it means for Christians today. So she's going to be coming and talking about that. Oftentimes, you hear a lot of perspectives on this, from spiritual warfare is not real to, I stubbed my toe getting out of bed and the devil made me do it or whatever. So lots of perspectives. So she's going to come and give a thoughtful engagement of that topic, like I said, Tuesday, October 14th at 7. So that is all the announcements. I'm sure he'll be happy for me to get off stage. But let me introduce our speaker tonight. He's come all the way from Nebraska, and so let's let him make the most of his time and get him up here. But this is Jake Meador. Jake Meador is the editor-in-chief of Mere Orthodoxy, a great website if you don't know about it and the things that they do there. And it's a semi-annual journal as well. And they work at the intersection of theology, politics, and culture. He also works as a contributing editor for The Plow and serves on the board of the Davenant Institute. Jake has written for various Christian media outlets: First Things, National Review, Christian Today, Commonweal, Books and Culture, Front Porch Republic, and others. So he's written in a wide array of great publications. He's also authored 2 books: In Search of the Common Good, Christian Fidelity in a Fractured World, and What Are Christians For? Life Together at the End of the World. He lives with his wife and 4 children. Bless his wife, who's back in Nebraska, I assume, with those 4 children. So Lord bless and strengthen her. But would you all welcome to the stage Jake Meador.
I just wanted to start by saying thank you all for being out here. Thank you to Lewis House for inviting me. It's been a joy to be here. It's actually only my second time in Kentucky, and the first time was at the other university, the right part of the state. So thank you for giving me a chance to see this part of the state. I wanted to begin by not knocking this lectern over. I wanted to start out the evening by reading a poem from a great son of this university, the poet, essayist, and novelist Wendell Berry. So I'm just going to read. It's one of his Sabbath poems. I'm just going to read it, and then we'll jump in. Even while I dreamed, I prayed that what I saw was only fear and no foretelling. For I saw the last known landscape destroyed for the sake of the objective. The soil bulldozed, the rock blasted. Those who had wanted to go home would never get there now. I visited the offices where, for the sake of the objective, the planners planned at blank desks set in rows. I visited the loud factories where the machines were made that would drive ever forward toward the objective. I saw the forest reduced to stumps and gullies. I saw the poisoned river, the mountain cast into the valley. I came to the city that nobody recognized because it looked like every other city. I saw the passages worn by the unnumbered footfalls of those whose eyes were fixed upon the objective. Their passing had obliterated the graves and the monuments of those who had died in pursuit of the objective and who had long ago forever been forgotten, according to the inevitable rule that those who have forgotten forget that they have forgotten. Men and women and children now pursued the objective as if nobody ever had pursued it before. The races and the sexes now intermingled perfectly in pursuit of the objective. The once enslaved, the once oppressed, were now free to sell themselves to the highest bidder and to enter the best paying prisons in pursuit of the objective, which was the destruction of all enemies, which was the destruction of all obstacles, which was to clear the way to victory, which was to clear the way to promotion, to salvation, to progress, to the completed sale, to the signature on the contract, which was to clear the way to self-realization, to self-creation, from which nobody who ever wanted to go home would ever get there now. For every remembered place had been displaced, every love unloved, every vow unsworn, every word unmeant, to make for the passage of the crowd of the individuated, the autonomous, the self-actuated, the homeless, with their many eyes open toward the objective, which they did not yet perceive in the far distance, having never known where they were going, having never known where they came from. So we'll pray and jump in. O God, you know us to be set in the midst of so many and great dangers, that by reason of the frailty of our nature, we cannot always stand upright. Grant to us such strength and protection as may support us in all dangers and carry us through all temptations. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. In his science fiction story, 17776, the writer John Boyes imagines a future in which human beings have inexplicably stopped being born and also have stopped getting sick and dying. Not only that, they have developed technologies that protect them from any kind of bodily harm. So if you are bored one day and decide to jump out of a 10-story window, these robots called nanos will sweep under you and catch you. And so it creates this world in which suffering and even in some sense scarcity have been abolished. People don't get sick and they don't die, so you don't really need to worry about food or shelter because you're not going to die anyway. So what do people do with this new utopia? The answer is that they invent and play increasingly elaborate games of football. For example, some of these are hilarious. In one game, Washington State and New Mexico State field teams that play on a field that is precisely 53 yards wide, like a normal football field, but the end zones are marked off by the Washington-Canada border on one side and the New Mexico-Mexico border on the other. And there are still only 11 players on each team. So the teams go up and down the field, which is 53 yards wide by 2 million yards long, cutting across mountains, deserts, and bodies of water. And the game actually ends when they go over a cliff into a ravine and realize that there is no way to get out of the cliff without leaving the field of play because you'll be out of bounds. And so it's trippy, but it's very funny. In another game, a running back who is about to be tackled decides to run up into a tornado so that she can be thrown several miles away, thereby escaping her would-be tacklers. You get the idea. New people aren't being born, no one gets sick, no one dies. All they have is eternity stretching before them, and what they do is play football. The obvious question you're probably wondering is, given all eternity, without any fear of death or sickness, why do that? Here I want to quote Boyce's response in the story, and this is from a conversation taking place between two of the main narrators, in which the older of the two explains to the other why. The Hubble telescope gave people stunning images of the cosmos, an endlessly bright and colorful universe for us to explore and conquer. It didn't turn out that way. Humanity tried and tried to send themselves to other solar systems. In 3143, they succeeded and found nothing. No life, nothing interesting, a bunch of planets full of rocks and gas. They then deployed probes to visit other stars in the Milky Way galaxy. But do you know how many stars are in that galaxy? There are 250 billion, specifically 257,880,113,002 stars. I haven't checked if this is Boyce's story. You have to use a minimum of 900 pounds of metal to build a deep space probe. So if you want to send one to each star, that's nearly 120 billion tons of metal. That demonstrates the enormity of the galaxy, yes? We can't visit each star because we literally don't have enough stuff to build it. We couldn't mine that much without seriously damaging our planet or another planet. So we built what we could and sent them out there. They found nothing even the slightest bit interesting. Everything was as we guessed it was when we saw it through the telescopes. It was the grandest anticlimax imaginable. It shattered what people thought of themselves and their destinies. The letdown was in itself sort of a brilliant wonder of its own. The space probes are all out there. They're still out there, ready to tell ground control if they see something. That is a fantasy because they won't. And if they do, it will be on a scale of time so impossibly vast that it may as well be never. People had a choice. They could continue wandering through the endless darkness and absence of everything they loved, an endless void of disappointment and loneliness, or they could look down and embrace what they always had and loved. In another passage, the same narrator explains further, I think they're doing the best they can with immortality. A human being will rarely admit this to you, but they tend to be terrified of living forever. They were born and raised with the understanding that their lives would end. They've achieved everything they wanted to achieve, overcome all the ills that plagued them, and now boredom is their only enemy. And they get up in the morning and fight it every day of their eternal lives. Recreation and play sustain them. Football sustains them. And if you find yourself in a football game that's such a gargantuan task that seems undefeatable, that will claim eons of your time and passion, I think that makes you one of the lucky ones. That's John Boyes. What I want to suggest tonight is that Boyes' imagined story is in some ways a kind of exaggerated and absolutized version of the world we actually have. Just consider some of these things. We've been to the moon. We have eradicated or learned to treat countless diseases and maladies that have in the past killed us. We produce amounts of energy and calories every year that are on a scale beyond anything that someone living 500 years ago could have imagined. Without overstating it, there is part of me that thinks if you took someone from the 16th century or maybe the 6th century and showed them our world today, they might well regard it in the same way we regard Boyes' world. But if that's true, why are so many of us so unhappy? Why do I see signs for suicide hotlines when I park on the roof of the parking garage that I use when I take my kids to the Children's Museum? Why are there billboards on my street encouraging everyone to carry Narcan so they can save the lives of someone who is ODing? Why is there a growing genre of reported features documenting the increasingly heavy relational loads that people now ask technology to bear for them as they turn to AI bots for everything from ordinary daily encouragement to persevere in life, to relationship advice to help with financial planning? Why have we made it so easy to engage in activities that give a surge of dopamine in the short term, but destroy us in the long term? I'm thinking of things like pornography or gambling on sports. When I set Boyes' short story next to the world we encounter every day, I cannot help thinking about the comedian Louis C.K.'s famous late-night TV rant, in which he listed out the technological marvels of our age before concluding, everything's amazing and no one is happy. This might seem like an odd way to begin a discussion of the ubiquity of therapeutic rhetoric and beliefs in contemporary America, including the church, but I think it defines the context for us in which the therapeutic has emerged as such a defining influence. We have been given a world of comparative wealth and technical accomplishment and comfort, but this world tells us no stories to anchor us or help us make sense of our lives, to make sense of the opportunity and wealth we already have. So here's one way we might name this problem that's facing us. So one of the ways we make sense of our lives, understand our identities, understand what it means to live well, is through stories. Mr. Barry's forthcoming novel, because he's 91 and he has the novel coming out next month, and as one does, is Marsh Catlett, The Force of a Story. And I've understood what he's talking about in that phrase, the force of a story, in my own life. So when I was in college, I was about to graduate, and I was like 6 months out, and I was moving to a new town. I wasn't sure what I was gonna do. I graduated in 2010, so I was like 18 months out from the economic crash. It's not a good time to graduate. I was trying to figure all this out. I was moving to a new city, and so I drove out into the country, which you don't have to go too far to get out of Lincoln. But it was winter and there was snow on the ground. It was very cold, and I pulled my car off of the side of this gravel road and I walked around for a while. And then I got back to my car and I was looking at it. I was like, I didn't mean to pull that far off the road. And so I got in the car and I turned it on and I tried to steer out and I was stuck. So by this time it's like midnight, temperatures are falling towards zero and I'm bundled up. But like, I'm 20 miles from home. This is not good. So I tried calling my roommates, and that was a bust. So then I called my parents, and if you're a parent, like, you don't want to get a call at midnight. It's your kid and they're in trouble. So my mom's voice like instantly ratchets up, and I assured her, no, I'm safe, I'm okay. I just have a problem. So she hands the phone off to Dad, and I explain the situation to him and tell him where I am, and he said, okay, I'll be there as soon as I can. About 35 minutes later, he pulls up, doesn't say anything, gets out of his car, walks around, sees the snow, sees how I'm stuck, shovels it out, tells me to get in the car, turn it on, and put it in lowest gear and give it gas when I tell you. So then he opens the door and kind of on the passenger side and braces his body against it and tells me to gas it, and I kind of fishtail out and I'm on the road. So I tell him thank you for like the 5th time at this point, and he smiles and says, it's okay, do you know how to get back into town? And I say yes. And then he pauses and he's like, you know the gas station on West O? I'm like, yeah. Why don't you follow me? And that was not a question, even though he phrased it as a question. So I followed him back into town, pulled into the gas station, got out, said thank you again. And finally he laughed and he smiled and he's like, you should have seen the way I got my car stuck when I was your age. And my dad always came and got me. And since then I've heard stories of how he got his car stuck when he was my age from my grandpa, and he did much worse than I did. So, but I think the force of a story like that, so 10 minutes later I was home and in bed and comfortable. The force of a story like that, I think we can understand. Being a father means that when someone in your family needs help and you're able to provide it, you go. And I have thought about that in my own life now, as I now have 4 kids, and there are nights where I'm cleaning up vomit or sleeping with a kid that can't go to sleep or whatever it might be. And I think about that story from my own life and my own father, and it then equips me to know what I need to do in this moment where I'm tired and don't want to be out. I just want to sleep, but my kid needs me. Okay, I know what to do. I remember. Like, this is how stories work. I think the problem we're facing now is what happens when you lose those stories. When you have tons and tons of people who are kind of spiritual orphans of a sort without stories like that, who don't know what to do in those situations, and they don't have those resources to draw on. And so one way you could define kind of the moment we're in is that we've rejected these given stories that we receive. And often we actually regard them as being inherently tyrannical or unjust because it's infringing on our private freedom, our ability to kind of create our own sense of purpose. And you can even find this in some of our Supreme Court rulings. This passage has been quoted a lot, but it's quite significant. It's from he's retired now, Justice Anthony Kennedy's opinion in the Casey ruling in 1992. Justice Kennedy wrote in this famous Mystery of Life passage, he said, at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and the mystery of human life. So other people don't get to define any of that stuff for you. You have to define it on your own. And the problem with that, David Brooks wrote an editorial about this when Justice Kennedy retired. That is quite a daunting homework assignment. Most or even all of us are not actually going to be up for that. And so then what happens? Another way of getting at it, you could look at, there's older philosophical roots for this. So in the years after World War II, there's a French philosopher named Jean-Paul Sartre, and he gave a paper called Existentialism as a Humanism. And what Sartre argues in the paper is that we are kind of thrust into the world against our, not by our choosing, you could even say against our will. And there's nothing in the world to define us or tell us who we ought to be when we arrive. His aphorism in the paper is existence precedes essence, which means that you kind of confront the stark reality of your own existence before there's anything to kind of define you or shape you or guide you. And you have to deal with that. And so Sartre coined the phrase condemned to be free to describe that. And for the existentialists, they actually saw this as liberating because it meant you make of your own life whatever you will. And you have the chance to take responsibility for yourself and use your agency to kind of stamp yourself however you wish and leave your mark on the world however you desire and however you're able. And so there was a kind of defiantness in it that thought the freedom, the condemned to be free, was actually a good thing. Sartre's sometimes friend was a Franco-Algerian writer named Albert Camus. And Camus wrote an essay on this called The Myth of Sisyphus. And Camus' point, he's citing a myth where the gods punish this character in Greek mythology to push a stone up a hill and then watch it roll back down for all eternity. And then he has to push it again. And Camus' very telling line at the end is, "We must picture Sisyphus smiling." And that's the way they dealt with this. What I think we're confronting today is what happens when you embrace that understanding of the world, to live freely in the world, you create your own sense of meaning and purpose, but you find that you can't sustain that indefinitely. Because we're actually not made to do that. From a Christian point of view, this is obvious. We're not made for that. That's not what God made us for. And so to tell people that's what they have to do, and that's the condition of their life in the world, is actually deeply inhumane. But this is what we've told people for decades, and now people are finding that difficult. You can't make a life and identity for yourself purely from your own desires and ambitions when those things change all the time and they're frustrated and thwarted and challenged. So you might say that the exhausted existentialist becomes a patient of the therapeutic, because the therapeutic emerges as a solution to our fatigue and dismay at the impossibilities demanded of us by a world without meaning or stories. And so that brings me to the core concern I'm talking about here, which is, how do we make sense of the ascent of these norms and discourses in our moment, and how can we respond to it constructively as Christians? The Australian pastor Mark Sayers has a podcast called Rebuilders, and he did an episode talking about this that I thought framed it really well. So there's going to be a few places here where I just quote somebody at length, because I think they already said it extremely well, and I'm not going to beat it, so I'm just going to let them kind of have the word there. So this is the way Sayers defined it, using kind of 5 diagnostic questions. So the first question is, what is the purpose of life? And in a therapeutic framework, the purpose of life is to feel peace. What is sin? The causing of mental or emotional discomfort or pain. What is the world? It is a dangerous place filled with pain, trauma, and discomfort. And so in a therapeutic, you're seeking a smaller world where you don't feel those things, or you can hide from them or escape from them somehow. What's the attitude toward faith? Well, faith can be acceptable when it is used as a tool for personal peace, but faith can also be problematic if it's used as something that provokes that trauma or anxiety or sense of unease. What is the solution to the moral ills of the world? This is Sayers' final question. Harm minimalization. Create a place that's safe where harm will not be done. So when I talk about kind of the therapeutic framework, I'm basically working from what Sayers has said here. So you could kind of describe the trajectory of how this works in this way. If you take given forms of identity and meaning and discard them, you instead get a vision, kind of a vision quest to create your own sense of significance and purpose. But when the world pushes back on that in some way, or you find something within yourself that's making that more complicated, you kind of are drowning for a little bit and you don't know what to do. The therapeutic steps in, not to give you a new end, but to give you techniques and strategies to cope with these things that are difficult, perhaps to give you some ways of naming these concepts so that you can continue on that kind of personalized identity quest, but now you have these new resources to help you. And the difficulty here for Christians, I think, is that in this framework, the therapeutic is built atop an approach to the world that's just inherently individualistic, even materialistic, and hostile to unchosen forms of identity. And that doesn't reconcile well with Christianity. Also, though, just in passing, if you're curious as to how like the vocation of a therapist or counselor might relate to this, I think this is something that can help with that. Because I think there is such a thing as a trained professional who understands things like childhood development or mental illness, and who can be a kind of external witness to another person's struggles and try to help them make sense of that, because they have unique experience and ability to do that. A marriage counselor, for instance, might be able to recognize and understand dynamics in a marriage that a husband and wife miss simply because they're living in the marriage and the counselor is outside of it and he's able to see it, and perhaps has seen other marriages with the same dynamic. So in this sense, counselors can sometimes almost play the role that like a wise old aunt or grandfather might have in the past. You're a person from the outside who, through your knowledge and experience, can offer guidance that the suffering person can't offer themselves. And so I want to like kind of disambiguate or distinguish that from this therapeutic framework from Sayers. The former is just one form, and it's not a perfect form. It's in a form that can be misapplied, but of care and counsel. Whereas the latter is a kind of ideology that's grown out of these experiential gaps in existentialism, or you could say expressive individualism. It's a way of coping with the lack of stories that give us a purpose. Philip Reef, who's one of the theorists that's written on this a lot, he refers to the therapeutic as a kind of secular Methodism. So if you think of it that way, you kind of like it's still that method for living life in a certain way, but it's been detached from Christian faith. Let's see, sorry, I'm catching up on my notes here. So I want to be really precise here, because if I'm correct and the therapeutic has emerged in this way out of a kind of spiritual void, then its answers are going to be different from those of traditional belief systems. So a traditional religious belief system, or even certain kinds of classical philosophical systems, will say that we have some kind of common end or goal that unites human beings that we are living toward. So in Christianity, that goal is to know God, or to be united to God in some way. The therapeutic, however, it's not repudiating the existential idea that we make our own meaning and that we're left to ourselves to sort through the chaos and opportunity of our lives. The therapeutic's an extension of it, an acknowledgement that such a life is immensely difficult and we need techniques and supports to help us do it. So rather than striving toward a common end together, as in Christianity, for example, or even like a simpler like common end your family might have together in your shared life, what we do under a therapeutic frame is we strive separately toward individualized ends while lamenting together the conditions and structures that frustrate us in that pursuit. The way my colleague at Mere Orthodoxy put it, Ian Harper, is he said, with nothing left outside of us to give us an identity, we have nothing left to identify with except for what is inside of us. And so what comes to unify us then is not the end to which that we desire, or that we seek to attain, but the maladies and evils that hinder us in pursuing those are separate ends. So in other words, we have rejected the idea of an end and replaced it with a journey to nowhere in some way. The point is the journey, not the end. And the associational bonds we now have are the irritants and opposing forces we encounter on that journey. So several, I think, very alarming things can follow from this once you have made all of those steps. So the first one is that I think you can come to identify with your condition. It even kind of becomes a personal trait that is like something you in some weird sense value in yourself, even if it's actually not healthy. So I wanted to read this excerpt. This is from Freddie DeBoer, who's not a Christian. I feel like he's been writing his way to Christianity for like 10 years, and I keep waiting for the conversion essay. It hasn't come yet. But it's one of those, you are so close to the kingdom sometimes. So DeBoer, he's a socialist writer who has bipolar disorder, and his life was completely obliterated by a severe episode in 2016, where he did a number of things that led to him losing his job, lost a number of writing opportunities, was basically on the brink of homelessness for several years because of this severe bipolar episode he had. And so this is the way he describes kind of his own frustrations with mental health discourse as it often exists. Quote, "This is what mental illness is now. Everything and anything except being sick, being unstable, being pathetic." And here, like, he's remembering his own experience when he says that. "When someone announces that they have depression, we nod along like they've told us their favorite baseball team. We slot it into our understanding of them. Ah, yes, she's the one with depression. That's her thing. People call anxiety my anxiety, the way you might talk about my freckles or my soft spot for old sitcoms. There's a knowing little smile when someone admits they're kind of OCD, as though it's charming, as though a habit of fussing with the dishwasher is the same condition as being so debilitated by intrusive thoughts about germs that you wash your hands until the skin sloughs off. Please read my memoir about how my borderline personality diagnosis prompted me to take a globe-trotting jaunt to a variety of picturesque locales where I learned lessons about life, love, and everything in between. Mental illness, after all, is only a character trait, an aesthetic, a posture. Yet when someone's depression leads them to ghost their friends for months, or when their mania makes them blow up a work meeting, or when their OCD makes it impossible for them to leave the house without hours of rituals, causing them to lose their job and fall into financial ruin, well, then all of those woke ableism decrying people act blindsided. It's not just surprise, it's a sense of grievance, as if it's somehow unfair when someone who has declared themselves to be mentally ill actually behaves that way. So Du Bois' point is that these conditions are real and they are devastating for people. And when we make therapeutic norms so ubiquitous, we actually undermine our ability to provide people with support who genuinely need it. And another writer, Freya India, shares this concern and has written about it as well. And she extends this into a second worry that I also share with them, which is that the adoption of therapeutic categories to interpret life are expanded so much that ordinary human characteristics and qualities become conditions that have to be analyzed, defined, treated, and so on. So this is how Freya India puts it, quote, "No one has a personality anymore." And then here's the extension of it. In a therapeutic culture, every personality trait becomes a problem to be solved. Anything too human, every habit, every eccentricity, every feeling too strong has to be labeled and explained. And this inevitably expands over time, encompassing more and more of us until nobody is normal. Some say young people are making their disorders their whole personality. No, it's worse than that. They are being taught that their normal personality is a disorder. According to a 2024 survey, 72% of Gen Z girls said that, quote, "mental health challenges are an important part of my identity." Only 27% of boomer men said the same. This is part of a deeper instinct in modern life, I think. This is still Freya India, to explain everything, psychologically, scientifically, evolutionarily. Everything about us is caused, categorized, and can be corrected. We talk in theories, frameworks, systems, structures, drives, motivations, mechanisms. But in exchange for explanation, we lost mystery, romance, and lately, I think, ourselves. We have lost the sentimental ways we used to describe people. Now you are always late to things, not because you are lovably forgetful, not because you are scattered and interesting and secretly loved for never arriving on time, but because of ADHD. You are shy and stare at your feet when people talk to you, not because you are your mother's child, not because you are gentle and sweet and blush the same way she does, but autism. You are the way you are not because you have a soul, but because of your symptoms and diagnoses. You are not an amalgam of your ancestors or curious constellation of traits, but the clinical result of a timeline of childhood events. Every heartfelt, annoying, interesting piece of you, categorized. The fond ways your family describe you, medicalized. The pieces of us once written into wedding vows, read out in eulogies, remembered with a smile, now live on doctor's notes and mental health assessments and BetterHelp applications. We are not people anymore. We have been products for a long time, and these are our labels. And then this is the third thing that I think becomes especially distressing from a social and kind of how does our life together, political life together, common life together function angle. So a correlate to this point is that if you accept this kind of therapeutic frame as defined by Sayers, the world's chaotic and dangerous and out to get you, and some kind of agent or power is needed to save you from that. The assumption becomes, as I once heard a trans colleague of mine put it, that it is not safe for you to exist in the world, for the real you as you internally understand yourself. So consider like the existential stakes that are getting loaded onto that statement. And note here, I'm not talking about like a medical intervention of some kind of treat depression that is needed. I'm talking about the public space that has to be defined in a certain way and how we encounter one another in it. This, after all, is the more sympathetic way you could frame politically correct speech. It's a question of recognition. Am I recognized as my true self in the communities that I am part of? And to a large degree, this is a deeply human desire that I think we all share to varying degrees. We all desire to be recognized, not in the sense of receiving awards or prestige, but simply in the sense of being known. The difficulty comes when you import this frame and you presuppose all these things about the world and about your own identity. And this creates a situation where a precondition for your being recognized in the world is some kind of act of force to push back the chaos and create, and I don't mean this in a demeaning way, I mean it descriptively, to create a safe space for you to be your true self. So one implication of this particularly because the American left tends to be more influenced by therapeutic forms than the right, is that an ironic alliance developed between corporate capitalism and the therapeutic left, in which HR departments became essential to creating that sort of place of safety for workers enmeshed with therapeutic ideas and beliefs. So the difficulty with this, as we've seen more recently, is that force is a capricious thing. And so the force that creates that safe space can be withdrawn, and that space disappears very quickly. And so the question it leaves me with is, if a person comes to believe that the expression of their authentic self is impossible in public life, that they will never receive the recognition they desire or need, that they will never be able to live their own truth in a public space, what do they do? And that's just a major question for coexisting together within a democratic society. So in closing, I want to talk about how do we respond kind of after the therapeutic, or how might we kind of move beyond the therapeutic? So I want to consider another popular account of heaven from popular culture in the last 10 years, which is the final episode of the NBC sitcom, The Good Place. Without explaining the entire show to you, suffice to say that in this final episode, the characters are all in heaven, and it's depicted as a kind of endless parade of pleasure set at one's fingertips. And eventually they find that heaven gets kind of boring, very like John Boyce's story. They desire escape. And in the show, the way they escape is they walk through this archway in the woods, and their being is dissolved into the universe. And this is how Chidi, who's one of the main characters, explains it in the finale. Picture a wave in the ocean. You can see it, measure its height, the way the sunlight refracts when it passes through, and it's there, and you can see it. You know what it is. It's a wave. And then it crashes on the shore, and it's gone. But the water's still there. The wave is just a different way for the water to be for a little while. That's one conception of death for a Buddhist. The wave returns to the ocean where it came from and where it's supposed to be. So the point I want to draw out, putting Good Place and 17776 next to each other, is that the thing that links them is this idea that even short of the things that frustrate or alienate us, the world ultimately exhausts itself. It becomes boring and tiresome, something you need to escape. And in Boyce's account, we cope with that through games of increasingly absurd and elaborate design. In The Good Place, we deal with it by dissolving our own distinct personal self and then somehow telling ourselves that it's good or desirable because what really mattered all along was being itself. The point that links them is a certain disappointment with the world and a need to find some way of escaping it or coping with it. The way I want to close tonight is to suggest, in the phrase of Barry, that perhaps we have thought up the wrong world. We have thought up a world that exists, as Hartmut Rosa says, as a point of aggression, which threatens us and must be brought under control so that we can carry out our project of identity creation. Rosa has a short book called The Uncontrollability of the World that's very good on this. And as we have found this works hard and unrewarding and alienating, we have cultivated new theories of the person and of society to help us cope. But what if the world isn't a point of aggression or is not purely a point of aggression? I thought about this because 2 nights ago, I was driving in late to the guest house I'm staying at in Wilmore while I'm down here. And I was using mapping software to get there, so it kind of took me on this weird meandering route. But I kind of like that because you get to see these beautiful little country roads. And it was late at night, and I was driving along, and I came around this bend, and I looked out my window, and this beautiful orange waxing gibbous moon was rising in the sky, framed between these old trees and these hills. And I had the thought, like, I've never seen the moon in that way before. Like, we don't have hills like that on the Great Plains. We don't really have any trees that old. It was all prairie. Like, all the trees we have are 100 years old max. I've never seen it that way, and it's been there my whole life. It's there every night. I've been around 37 years. Like, I've had plenty of chances to look and see this thing, but I was seeing it now in this way I never had before. And then I had a further thought, which is that I'm in central Kentucky. I'm not that far from Barry's home. I'm seeing this thing that he has been delighted by many times in a way very like he has seen it, and very like the way all the people that he has loved that came before him have seen it. And so even though there is nothing really, I was looking at the moon, but I was encountering it in a different way. And because of the work that Barry has done, I was encountering it in kind of on several different levels. simultaneously, and feeling deeply grateful for God's creativity, his love of beauty, and for also the way that Barry has described that so beautifully and memorably and has helped me see it in a new way. So what I'm trying to say is something like this. When we experience the world as a threat to ourselves, as this inherently alienating thing, perhaps the deficiency is not in the world, or not only in the world, but perhaps there's something also deficient in us. This is something that Martin Luther will talk about sometimes, is that we often behave as if God's world is opaque and we are clear, or God's word is opaque and we are clear. And actually, and we struggle to interpret it because it's opaque. And Luther says we have to reverse that. God's word is clear and it interprets us. And we're the ones that are kind of shrouded and opaque. I was reminded also, there's a passage in Orthodoxy where Chesterton kind of speculates. He's talking about the love of repetition that a child has. And he says, perhaps the sun rises every day because God, like the child, says again. And perhaps in that sense, we've become older than our Creator. So if there's a way of reckoning with the therapeutic, I don't think it's with a simple dismissal of everything adjacent to therapy culture, be that mental health diagnoses, which are often all too real, as Freddie Dubler's experienced, or counseling help, which is often badly needed. Rather, I think we do this best by questioning the latent narrative that undergirds much of what might be called therapeutic culture or therapeutic framework, even if discrete therapeutic practices can be disambiguated from that sometimes. The narrative that justifies and grounds therapeutic culture is one in which prevailing stories about the ends of human life, its purposes and meanings, have been deconstructed and displaced. In Rief's term, Rief is working from Freud. So Rief says the cultural superego has lost its focal point or purpose. Rief is interesting because he doesn't see the therapeutic as being an inward turn at all. It's a very external thing as we try to deal with this gap in our experience. The therapeutic asserts itself as a means of helping us reckon with what it is to live in a world of chaos, lacking purpose or belonging. But I think, to borrow once more from Barry, this is an exercise in thinking up the wrong world. And what is needed is perhaps a turn back toward what Marilyn Robinson has called the givenness of things. And yet I don't want to stop there. We're about done, but I don't want to stop there because I think there's one final wrinkle here we have to recognize because of the context we're in. I don't want us to come away from this just kind of sounding like sentimentalists or romantics who think that some kind of mystical experience looking at the beautiful creation will solve all our problems, because that's not the point. And it can be inadequate, because if we just give people who are already deeply alienated from the world that kind of advice, they might find that not very helpful. What I want to suggest is that perhaps we're in a moment where it is for us to become someone else's given. We must become a community's given thing. We must become a forgotten or neglected place's given thing. We can ourselves, in some sense, become that givenness in our relationships to our neighbors and our homes. And I recognize that there's something paradoxical or ironic in that, because isn't the point of something being given that it is not up to you to produce it? And that's a fair question, but I think it's missing something, which is that a condition of creaturely life in a tragic world is that there are few good, true, or beautiful things that cannot be overthrown or destroyed. To the extent that we can speak of receiving good given things in our own lives, that is often only because our elders preserved them and gave them to us. It may be the case that in an age of spiritual orphanhood, it is our calling to retrieve and repair those given creaturely goods so that they can become a home or anchor of sorts for those who come after us. This, of course, is precisely what I think Mr. Barry has done. The poem I read to begin tonight is a story of destruction and unmaking, and Mr. Barry has witnessed much of that firsthand. But in his imagination, in his affections, and in his written work, he has kept alive the memory of those things and made it accessible to people like me. It is not that we must make these things because they never existed, but to be clear, but I do think we must recover a great many things that have been forgotten. And this will be difficult in itself, but also doubly difficult because the postures that allow us to recover and repair are not the postures of violent revolution and reaction. And much in our day incentivizes us toward the revolutionary. So our project is not to move fast and break things, as in the much cited slogan of Silicon Valley, but rather to move slowly and repair things, as Tish Harrison Warren has said. It is to model through our own living and the living of our communities those older forms of life in which meaning and belonging is found through common loves and common ends. And in doing this, perhaps we can help people who have lost hope of ever having a shared purpose or end to discover that such a life is still possible. I'm going to give the final word here to a friend of mine, Stephen Peter, who put it well. He said, "The posture of repair attunes the church to its needs to minister and preserve a society on the verge of breaking down. Instead of having a defensive or triumphalist posture, repair taps into what Christians are best at doing, helping those in need. Our culture does not give guidance on how to interact with the opposite sex. The church should aid in modeling romance, flourishing marriages, and fulfilling family life. Zero-child households are becoming the norm. The church, in response, should be saying, here's how you date, let us help you. Here's how we've married, let us help you. Here's how we've parented, let us help you. Our culture is marked by profound loneliness. The church should model generous hospitality and deep commitment to the community. Our culture does not know how to have hope in times of adversity. The church should model suffering and perseverance. No one else is going to repair these institutions. Only the church can." Thank you.
Okay, we are going to transition to a time of Q&A. We're going to have a couple mic runners that will be running about the room. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll bring you a mic. And I'm going to start with this one right here.
Thanks, Jake. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Just in the context of being in the Lewis house, I recall Lewis was interviewed once asking what the purpose of the party was, and his answer kind of took me back. He basically said he's writing against deconstructionism, and I wonder if he was somewhat prophetic based on some of the things that you addressed.
Yeah, I think so. He had a sci-fi trilogy that he wrote kind of initially as a deal he made with Tolkien. And then in classic Tolkien fashion, Tolkien never wrote the books he was supposed to write as part of the deal. So only Lewis did. But so the first two books are called Out of the Silent Planet and Perelandra, and they're both very, Tolkien adored them. They're very similar to Tolkien in many ways. The third book is called That Hideous Strength. And it's a deeply weird, it's the weirdest Lewis book you will read probably. It's meandering and long, and yet it's really the only book other than Screwtape Letters where you can see just how profoundly funny C.S. Lewis could be. Some of the ways he parodies speech is hilarious. But one of the things that's really striking in That Hideous Strength is that there's this kind of great scientific company trying to take over the nation and basically wreck humanity. Like they have this deeply inhumane project. And what Lewis's heroes do in the story is they basically retreat to a home that they share together, and they live a common life of prayer and work and waiting to see what God will do. And you can argue that there's a certain sense in which some of Tolkien has that streak as well. They're very averse to thinking that, oh, there's just this one simple hack or technique you can use that will solve all the things. They're much more interested in kind of the basic questions of what are you called to in this moment. Don't answer that in terms of like, well, I have to solve this great cultural problem. Like you in your relationships, in your place, what's God giving you to do? And you should do that and leave the large things that you can't control to God. And it's always striking, it's such a counterintuitive kind of proposal relative to how we think about a lot of these things. And it's actually even funny, Orwell reviewed the book, That Hideous Strength, because it came out a few years before Orwell died. And Orwell loved the depiction of this kind of dystopian society and how deeply and well Lewis developed it. And the thing Orwell disliked was that there was this supernatural intervention at the end that brought renewal. And Orwell felt like that's not how the world works. That's not how you beat this stuff. So it's just an interesting kind of tell in the difference between them. But yeah, I mean, I think it's easy in very kind of deconstructive moments. Like people are deconstructing, they don't use scalpels or pocket knives, everything's dynamite. And it can be easy to want to respond to that with dynamite as well. And Lewis, I think, would call us to a different kind of response that can seem counterintuitive, but I also think that when you look at scripture, makes a great deal of sense. Thank you.
Thank you. There were two underlying themes that you mentioned throughout that I just wanted to name explicitly, and my question is related to the unity of these two themes. You opened up with Wendell Berry and the destruction of the landscape, but then this is really about the kind of devastation of the soulscape, if we can say something like that, not to try to sound too poetic. But the other dimension was fatherhood, which you only touched upon a little bit towards the beginning and then again towards the end. And I suppose that that first theme is really about how everything is engineering, more or less, right?
Yeah.
Everything is an object. I know one writer says that we've all become meat Legos in a cyborg theocracy, right? Mary Harrington, yeah. And so one of your key guiding threads to an answer is about man's end. And so obviously there's obviously theological dimension to that, but there's also, a natural dimension of it. And I wanted to highlight maybe if you had an answer to how fatherhood and this response to engineering can form a new kind of psychology. And because the psyche is another end of man. If the final end, right, is God, but the formal cause of man is like the soul. And so if psychology is characterized by like a lack of fatherhood because everything is sort of self-creating and we're all disintegrating, we're all sort of almost like becoming that head on display, which doesn't really say anything in that hideous strength. What does the new psychology look like that is real therapy, that can cultivate the soul, work with the form that is given, that is already there? I don't know if the question makes sense, but.
Well, I think it relates to that thing at the end of like trying to become for others what they've not received or experienced. Right? I mean, like, so, I don't remember so after the second book came out, a friend of mine was talking to me about it, and he commented that you wrote a story about social life and kind of political theology in which the hero is your father. And I thought that was like my favorite response to the book. Because I think this is in there. It's been a few years since I wrote it, so I don't remember all of it. But so my dad had a traumatic brain injury in December of 2015 and is paralyzed on his left side now. A few months before that happened, he was having trouble breathing and having some kind of medical episodes. And they'd scheduled a surgery because they had figured out that he had this small hole in his heart that was causing clots to form. And they thought the clots were all in his legs. So they're like, so we're gonna get you on a blood thinner. We think you're okay to get through like the next month or two before we can get you into surgery and get this fixed. And then it turned out a week before surgery, the clots had gotten to his lungs. And they gave him a clot buster to try and save his life because his heart was failing, and the clot buster caused a bleed on the brain. So it's basically like a medically induced stroke. But a few months before that had happened, he was having a hard time getting around. And there was a young woman from their church who my parents had been getting to know. And she had come from a pretty broken home. Dad disappeared when she was 5, never had much of a relationship with him. And she needed help moving some furniture, and my parents had a pickup truck, and my mom kind of volunteered my dad to help her remove it, and he had said he could do it. And then the day he was supposed to do it, he could barely walk because it turned out he had blood clots in his lungs. And mom was like asking him not to go because of how hard he was finding it to move. And my dad's comment to her was something to the effect of, I am not going to be another man in her life who said he would do something and then didn't show up. And so he went there that day, and he move the stuff for her, even though he was having trouble breathing. And so I think those are the kind of things that really, like, he didn't have a relationship to her. She was a woman from his church. But those are the kind of things we can do and be for people. But I mean, it requires a certain measure of attentiveness that can feel a little bit hard or daunting. I mean, another thing is it can require actually people being willing to ask for help. Like, that's one of the things a pastor friend of mine in Lincoln complains about. He's like, you Nebraskans are so independent. None of you want to ask for help ever. And so he's like, I've got this church full of wonderful people who have so much to offer, and they don't have anyone to help because no one will ever ask for anything.
Just then to go back to your point about
Givenness.
Mm-hmm.
In order to insulate that from it being guided only by sentiments, is there something in there then about the objectivity, the givenness of mission? That sometimes a task is given and you're there to perceive it. It's out, so that there's a second moment past the givenness of receiving a mission being sent out.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm in a church tradition where we take membership vows when we join a church, and like we should take those more seriously. Like, I think you could argue that what my dad was doing that day was just a natural entailment of those vows that he had taken within the church. Like, so when we receive a new member, they turn to the congregation and they ask us about and raise our hand and say we do. And I had a pastor who used to joke when we would do that. He'd be like, oh, look at all those children's ministry volunteers. And he was joking, but there's something real to that, I think. And I think it can feel kind of informal, oh, it's just this thing we do, but we should actually think about what's being said there and take it seriously, because it really is a commitment we're making to each other. Is that kind of what you're thinking of?
No, yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
This isn't a well-framed question, but a response. I find as I'm following your words that so much, it's very, you didn't say this, but it's implied, this is a first world problem, the therapeutic culture. And as we hear you describe the problem and we realize, yes, this is a first world, the fact that you brought up Wendell Berry is so interesting because, the creaturely needs that are so beautifully met by our time spent in natural surroundings. Mm-hmm. You alluded to that, mentioning the hills and seeing the moon. It seems so much in this trajectory you've described that the humility to go back to one's creaturely needs is very healthy. And I wonder if given more time, you would do more with that in your writing, if it interests you, or perhaps the Wendell Berry reference is because you're in Kentucky. But I'm considering that there could be more. For those of us, I moved here from New York, and people were very critical of, oh, how could you ever leave New York? It's the center of the universe. Well, that's just where I went to grad school. That's all that was. So we suffer sometimes being in this part of the country. We're being undervalued for some qualities of life that are actually very deeply healthy. And some of us find, and I'm a church goer, that the church hasn't joined into that sufficiently because our striving for correct doctrine, for full learnedness, with all respect to the Lewis House, can lead to this exhaustion again that is again a pride reaction that forgets our creatureliness. And I'm very, very, very interested in this creatureliness as a callback to health. Yes. I think we ignore it to our peril. Or perhaps I'm just really going on a tangent that's only in my head.
So my oldest son is named Robert Wendell for my dad and for Barry. So it's not just a Kentucky thing. I have a signed copy of Jaber Crow back home. It was great. So the first time I met him, the couple we did our premarital with, we read Hannah Coulter with them and discussed that as part of talking about marriage. And I told Barry that when he was signing my book, and he goes, "Oh, help any?" But no, so it's not just an appeal to the Kentucky audience. Yes, so there's several ways you could take that. I think so. Just on a very basic level, you could get into a lot of like how we learn and how humans are healthy, kind of like physically healthy thing. And there's lots of work done on. I mean, like actually, the book's called Last Child in the Woods, and I'm blanking on the author's name now.
Yes.
But he actually coined the phrase nature deficit disorder as a way of describing.
Louis,
Yeah. Yes. Louv? L-O-U-V.
Louis,
I
okay.
think
I have his
that's
books at home.
Yeah. So he talks about that there. I also just thought about it. Like if you're reading Language in the Wardrobe, and spring is coming to Narnia, and the children are going to meet Aslan, note how many flowers the Pevensey children recognize and can name as they're walking there. That's always struck me. So I'm like, I couldn't, like if I was set loose in the woods like that, I would not be able to name all of those things that these children just seemed to know. And it was so normal that they would know it that Lewis just included it, and it wasn't some special thing. I mean, beyond that, there's interesting, like I didn't work with him at all for this, but there's an English writer named Paul Kingsnorth who has a book coming out called Against the Machine.
Good.
And he's got this whole kind of essay series. It was originally on Substack, and he's now expanded it and adapted it for this book that's coming out next month, where he's trying to name this kind of distinctly modern ideology that we have. And he refers to it as the machine. And it's not like any one machine, but it's this way of kind of reducing reality to kind of component parts that can be mixed and matched together, which is also Mary Harrington's thing in her Feminism Against Progress.
Yeah.
Is that the book? Yeah. So Harrington likens us to meat Legos. Anything about Legos, you disassemble them and reassemble them however you want. So yeah, I think Kingsnorth and Harrington are both interesting people to kind of pair with a lot of this. And Kingsnorth actually, he wrote the essay and edited the volume of Barry's essays that were published in the UK maybe 10 years ago. And interestingly, Kingsnorth was a longtime environmental activist who's now actually become a Christian. And he has this essay called The Cross and the Machine. It's been published in First Things and the Free Press, both. Genuinely one of the best essays I've read, but conversion narrative as well, which is really striking and encouraging to me. I think there's someone in the, I think someone's getting a picture.
Hello, my name is Chris Cox. I'm with Change Lives, and when I saw this, I was fascinated by it because my master's is in counseling and human development, so I am a therapist. And so what I've noticed over the years is, thank God I was a Christian first before I went for a master's. I was a social worker, left the educating UK, got my degree at UK, my bachelor's and everything, and then kind of stepped out of the arena for a while and went back, got my master's and everything. In that time, I became a Christian, and apologetics is my love. And so I was able, as I got my master's and everything, I was able to write some papers that stung the professors, right? But intentionally, I wanted to work through it, and what I've found is that my theological position is redeeming the therapy. And what I've found now is that a lot of people are really looking for truth. And a lot of times, after the first session, I'll hear from a lot of people, it's like, you're not like the other therapist. I said, no, I'm here to find the truth. That's what you're here for, right? And so they really enjoy the theological journey that they've been missing in other therapy. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, and so that exploration and that journey is if you guide it well, it's an awakening. Really is what you're trying to do, is you're trying to bring them to the conclusion step by step as they walk themselves through the process. And then if you can just see it come on to life. You know, and it takes a while, you know, discussion of the worldviews and all that kind of stuff to bring them in line with philosophy, the theology, and kind of bring them through it. But you know, I like the whole idea of blending theology with the therapy, and then restructuring the therapy to meet the theology, and with Christ always being the center of it all. And it seems like I think a lot of therapists probably ought to get on board with that. Because it's really, really effective. It's just incredible how effective that is, and how so many people are in therapy trying to find truth. They just don't know what the truth is.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that I think because we live in a very these are cliches, but they're cliches for a reason. We live in a very fragmented and polarized, invoke all cliches, kind of political moment. There is an enormous amount of pain and hurt all around us. And quite often people don't know what to do with that. This is another Freya India essay where she talked about you don't need to broadcast your mental health illness or your mental health diagnosis to Instagram. And she was talking, basically the upshot of it was the internet is a terrible place to go with your pain. But that then does raise that is, I mean, you think about as people kind of normalize using AI bots and other things, that is the route that a lot of people go. If there is a human connection people feel comfortable in sharing these things with, it often is a counselor or a therapist. And so being able to walk people through that in a broader and more Christian way, I think sounds like a great use of that vocation. So thank you for your work.
And not a diagnosis.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what it is, but it's not necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
You know, and that's it.
Let's give you our final question here.
That's a lot of pressure. I work with students, middle school through medical school, on pro-life issues. And I know you talked a little bit about on the left where you see some of the therapyism, whatever you want to call it, coming through. Have you seen that on the right? And if so, do you have a solution to it? If you don't, I'll just take your thoughts on it.
I'd be curious to talk to you more about that. So on that Rebuilders episode I mentioned with Sayers talked about 4 different kind of frames that he used the same 5 questions to define. And it was moralistic, therapeutic, hedonistic, and nihilistic. And Sayers I'm trying to remember, it's been a while since I listened to it, but if I'm recalling correctly, Sayers said the moralistic and therapeutic often in this moment tend to be more left-coded, which is funny because I grew up in the 90s, and in the 90s, Ned Flanders was on The Simpsons, and moralism was very right-wing coded. But that's flipped. And there is a kind of dynamic where when the moralistic fails, the therapeutic kicks in for more kind of left-coded spaces. And then Sayers' thought, and I had the same thought as I was listening, is that the reaction to the moralistic stuff from the right tends to go more toward hedonism, I think. Because basically it's this I'm tired of HR types or Karens scolding me for X, Y, or Z. And I just want to be a dude having fun with my friends, and why are you kind of interfering in that? And so it's kind of the barstool response, like Portnoy or Pat McAfee would be another example. It's this kind of hedonistic response, which often lacks any kind of moral content, but also has more of a live and let live posture than the moralistic side does. I'd have to think about it in the therapeutic applications in kind of a more conservative space, because I don't feel like I've seen that as much, but I'd be curious to talk to you more about that.
Okay, well, let's give Jake a round of applause. couple of quick announcements. First, we do have some of Jake's books upstairs, so you can buy those from us. Enormously discounted price, probably like 60-70% off. I'm sure Jake would be happy to sign them after this as well. And then one other announcement, Brian mentioned at the beginning that we are exploring some trips that we're going to offer. We made an announcement several months ago about maybe trying one this last summer. We were really late in the game. We knew that. We just kind of threw it out there to see what kind of interest we get. And there was a lot of interest, but a lot of you are like, hey, are you have vacation plans or it's not going to work? So we're like, okay, we'll reevaluate, kind of get our ducks more in a row, and then offer a trip for next summer. So we are going to offer an Oxford trip for next summer for any of you who want to go. For a long time, CSF, Lewis House have offered spring break trips, and these are for students, and so we make them as cheap as possible. We are like piling up in a hostel, that kind of trip. So in fact, last time, or 2 times ago, I've led the Oxford trip a few times, and one of the times we actually did stay in a hostel in Oxford, and it was pretty sketchy. Okay, just but it was cheap, and college students like cheap. Well, this is not going to be that. Okay, so we have we've already reserved the blocked rooms in some 5-star hotels in Oxford actually that are quite nice, and it's going to be kind of slanted towards seeing Inklings, and especially C.S. Lewis sites. So we'll see the kilns. We're going to meet up with some Lewis authors like Michael Ward, who wrote Planet Narnia, and Simon Horvin, who wrote a book on C.S. Lewis recently. We're also going to have like a theology lecture at Oxford, so if you want to feel what it's like to be an Oxford student for a day, and much, much more. You can check that out on the website. We have only 20 slots available, and actually somebody already signed up. This is the first time we've announced it, but there's already a sign up on there. We put it on there this afternoon. So there's 19 spots available. So if you're interested, go on there. There's no deposit due until December 1st, but because of the limited spots, you are going to make kind of a verbal commitment, I guess, by signing up on the form. And so if you are in, you can go to lewishouse.org/Oxford. There's also /travel page that tells you a little bit more about the vision. And then the Oxford trip will tell you a little bit more about what we're doing, the cost. You can see the hotels there that we're staying in, and much, much more. If you have questions about that, feel free to stop me after this, or you can email me, dking@lewishouse.org. I'd be happy to talk more about it. Other than that, thank you all, and we'll see you next month, October 16th for Joy Vaughn.